Thank you for joining us. We were just talking about the Latin music beat, salsa, that I played at the beginning of the show. And I segue into humanity and the concern of those who might be in the path of Hurricane Irma. And, you know, let's not forget those who are still struggling to get their lives back together and have a life of normalcy in Houston, in Texas. Yes. That Latin salsa beat was really cool as a segue musically. And right after that, you went into your first segment, which was...
My first segment, it was about Black Swan Records, which was the very first black recording company, which was made for blacks by blacks musicians, and this was much before the times of Motown, which is certainly the most famous black recording studio, Berry Gordy. And I went over that segment again, like I said at the beginning of the show, and with my definitions, this was all in honor of Labor Day here, which I understand I'm late for.
Relax, take your time. Do the intro for this segment that they're watching.
Yes, this is Behind the Mic, the short series where we discuss what we did today on the radio. Behind the Mic, I'm Andrew Coates. Today for the radio, like I said, went over Labor Day. A couple of black companies that help with black labor and getting people into work and jobs. So today for Behind the Mic, while I was going over it again, all Labor Day based, let's talk about the history of African Americans and labor. Of course, unfortunately, things have to start with slavery as far as labor goes. However, I would like to more or less segue into the period of when African Americans were trying to assimilate into society after slavery was abolished and trying to get jobs. Of course, I can only imagine that it was easier for them to get lower level jobs, you know, just, have him like work the machine in the factory or like pick up the mail or whatever. Or like maids or maid work, housework, things like that, restaurants, just lower class, probably minimum wage jobs, instead of the higher class jobs that will require probably like a college degree, which was a big achievement at the time, high school education, all things which were very valuable at that time and still are now. So what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you let me come in there. I want to say that a lot of African Americans during that period were self-educated, self-taught. By any means necessary is really what they demonstrated. After slavery, Reconstruction, and black wealth, we had more wealth, we had more unity in the community than, I'm afraid to say, we do now, today. Have you ever heard of Black Wall Street?
Yes.
Of course you have, right? Flourishing black communities, because of segregation, no other choice but to deal with and keep the money in our own neighborhoods and communities. Now today, our neighborhoods and communities, while we live in the hood, it's not a neighborhood because the dollar is going to somebody else.
That's true.
Okay? I'm not mad at nobody because they were smart enough to come in our neighborhood and take our money. Oh, I'm not angry at all. Of course, you can't see my face. I'm smiling, right? But, and so I like to think that somehow that has been rekindled. After segregation was ended in America, it's like we dropped our lollipops in the sand for the ocean. And the ocean was to be able to segregate into the major population, assimilate into a population that never wanted us. Okay? and I'm not speaking for everybody, I'm just saying. And I need to say, right along with African Americans, you know, if you were Jewish, if you were Irish, if you were anything, if you were not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you were not accepted in American society. Anyone with the history of that would tell you that, okay? So, anyway, I kind of went too far. Bring me back. What other segment did you do there?
I also went over the first black-owned bank, which was the.
Well, now was that in Washington D.C.? I mean, Washington D.C. It wasn't in Virginia.
I believe so, but it was like chartered in D.C. Yeah, but it wasn't the first black-owned bank to be opened. I said that in the segment, but it was the first one to be chartered and the first one to to have permission to open. It's just that there was a bank before that beat it to being open.
Now, why did you see a financial institution like a bank being important to present as a segment?
Well, because it was actually inspired off of a video that I saw, which was an African American who was going over how of course, over all the centuries, it's been very, very obvious from the beginning, like you said, that we were brought into a community that we weren't allowed to be in for the longest part of history, and even now, of course, there's still many remnants of that. But he was actually going on the offensive and being a little more critical to African Americans nowadays, kind of circling back to what you said, how the period right after the Civil War and slavery seemed to be the most brotherhood of African Americans, leading all the way up to, he would say, about the 60s, when African Americans came together. They were always together. They would come together. They had their own towns, their own banks, the supermarkets and things. But around the end of the Civil Rights Movement, he said that's when things started to falter. That's when the more stereotypes of African Americans that we see nowadays showed up. Drugs, gangs, hoodlums, shootings, stuff like that. And he said with that, he feels that blacks have lost their sense of brotherhood for the most part, and it's evident, one of the ways he said, in the lack of black-owned businesses. Because you could go into any black neighborhood, you'll find the Chinese food place owned by the Asians. You'll find the liquor store owned by an Indian guy, most likely. You'll find plenty of white-owned chains, banks and supermarkets and stuff, but there's never any black-owned businesses. The only black-owned business you'll most likely find is the barbershop, and that's it, the hair salon. That's the only thing you'll find in there. So where's all the other black-owned businesses? We're more than willing to open up our wallets for other races and other cultures to bring their businesses over here, but why can't we have a black-owned business other than a barbershop or beauty salon? And that was one of the things that inspired me, because I thought that was pretty spot on.
And how old are you?
16.
Talk to your peers right now. What do they need to know?
Well, I would say what you need to know is as we grow up and we get older and the adults, they hand over the country to us, we should certainly put that in the back of our heads to remember and say, I believe personally, as of now, one of the best things for us to do as the African American minority in this country, promote black businesses, promote black-owned banks, supermarkets, everything. We need to make our own chains. We need to make our own places of business to run business and do business for ourselves, because no one else will, and we shouldn't expect them to.
I like that. I like that. And were there any other segments that you did today?
Well, other than that segment, This Week in Black History.
Oh, yeah. What was This Week in... Do you remember what This Week in Black History was?
The one right off the bat was Lewis Latimer being born September 9th in Massachusetts.
What did Lewis Latimer do?
He worked, of course, with Thomas Edison. Actually, right over there in West Orange, where I live, I took a tour of his house and his laboratories 2 years back. Very, very, very interesting stuff. If you're a history buff like me, it's certainly a wonderful place to go.
Now, if you're a history, I'm interjecting in here. If you're a history buff, have you ever researched and ran into the patent wars?
The patent wars.
Yeah. In other words, you make you create an invention,
and you can patent it at the patent office.
and there were patent wars, meaning if you invented something. Well, let's just say if you got it patented, didn't necessarily mean that you what? Invented it.
You invented it, right.
Because it was all about who got the patent
First.
Yeah. And there have been many inventions by African Americans in America that they were not able to manipulate the system of being able to patent a business or an invention. And so they were manipulated.
One of the biggest examples would actually be the cotton gin that was invented by an African American, I believe, to help the black people, to make things easier for them, because I think they would have to I think they would pick less cotton or they would pick more cotton. Either way, it was invented by a black man, but a white man, he took that invention, and it was one of the biggest things in slavery. That was one of the things that really sparked it, as we know today, that brought the millions of workers in, millions of slaves into the fields, because you could use the cotton gin to make production easier, make clothes and things like that. So that's probably the biggest example there, right off the top of my head.
Yeah. So did you enjoy yourself? I hate to ask you such a simplistic question.
Certainly, of course. We had a lot of great segments in here today. I feel a lot of good history was unfolded. Even this behind the mic is very good. We're getting into a lot of things here. Yes, I think.
I'll tell you what's interesting about behind the mic today. What's different is you've actually gone off on a tangent on something that you knew about and you can speak from the heart with, from an educational, scholarly point of view and perspective. But sometimes you have to go with your gut. And all that education and scholarly do drip, you know, like I said, and I'm going to end my speech on this. You got all types of religions, all different types of politics and beliefs and understandings. But you only have one right and wrong. And today I'm feeling so right with Quest Community Vibrations.
Certainly. And with that, I believe that's a good place to wrap up the show. This, of course, will be posted on YouTube, so please like and subscribe. Please comment. You can find us on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, and, of course, YouTube and Twitter. Hit all the buttons that are good for us. Of course, you can always catch the show 9:30 to 10 in the AM on channel 89.5 FM, 89.5 FM. Please listen to there, where we get into the main meat of our topics here. You can listen to our discussions and segments firsthand. You can find us on our website, questyouthradio.com, questyouthradio.com. Plenty of stuff up there for you to look at. Thank you very much for watching Behind the Mic, and stay conscious.
Say your prayers for those in the path of Hurricane Irma.